You're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, local news, and all that jazz with your host, Elia Sinclair. Tune in for a new show every Friday at 106.5 KQWZ LP-FM, South King County.
Hello and welcome to this week's show of the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about art, life, local news, and all that jazz. I'm your host, Elia Sinclair, and today we're going to kick off with a segment I call Food for Thought. In the Bell Jar, Sylvia Plath writes, "I saw my life branching out before me like the green fig tree in the story. From the tip of every branch, like a fat purple fig, a wonderful future beckoned and winked. One fig was a husband and a happy home and children, and another fig was a famous poet, and another fig was a brilliant professor, and another fig was E.G., the amazing editor, and another fig was Europe and Africa and South Africa, and another fig was Constantine and Socrates and Attila and a pack of other lovers with queer names and offbeat professions, and another fig was an Olympic lady crew champion, and beyond and above these figs were many more figs I couldn't quite make out. I saw myself sitting in the crotch of this fig tree, starving to death, just because I couldn't make up my mind which of the figs I would choose. I wanted each and every one of them, but choosing one meant losing all the rest, and as I sat there, unable to decide, the figs began to wrinkle and go black, and one by one, they plopped to the ground at my feet." The root of the word decide is the same as the words homicide and suicide. It is the Latin word caedere, which means to cut. To make a decision, to choose a course of action, is to cut off the infinite other courses of action we could decide upon. This causes us to freeze, to fall victim to the intellectual paralysis by analysis for fear of making the wrong decision. We never make one at all, and watch the figs of our wildest dreams fall from the tree and rot at our feet. But what if there is no such thing as a wrong decision? There are only decisions, and each one will lead to its own robust universe of trials and triumphs to be enjoyed and explored. What if we could release ourselves from the Platonic ideal of dualism, this concept of division into two perpetually opposed aspects, and instead live within a harmony of wholeness, where every decision is not a life or death consideration between what is wholly good and what is wholly bad, but instead a harmonious moving forward in peace. The next time you're faced with making a decision, try to lean into joy, to the choice that leaves you more whole than divided, releasing yourself from the fear of making a mistake, because you know there are no mistakes to be made, just a glorious life to live.
You're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, local news, and all that jazz with your host, Elia Sinclair.
Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Elia Sinclair, and you're listening to the B-Town Breakdown, where we talk about life, art, local news, and all that jazz. Today I'm here with actress, director, and teacher Rochelle Flynn. Hello, and thanks for being here.
Great. Hi.
Hi.
Glad to be here.
You have been very involved in the arts as an arts advocate for the city of Burien for the past while. Like 30 years, you said, that you've been involved?
I've
more or less?
lived here for a little over 30 years, and I would say I got actively involved probably about 25 or 26 years ago.
Wow, it's a long time. Can you tell me a little about that work?
Sure.
I mean, I know it spans a long time, but...
Sure. A lot of it has certainly been theater. Many years ago, before I lived in Burien, I actually did a show at what was then called Burien Little Theater, and it's how I met my husband.
Love a good theater romance.
Yes. And I had no idea I'd actually wind up living in Burien. And so it sort of started with, I had taught drama. I've taught drama a lot for, improv and creative dramatics and that sort of thing for kids, for adults, for special needs, all sorts of things. And they were looking for teachers for teens at the Parks Department. That's how I initially got involved and started teaching. That sort of spread to, there was an opening on the Arts Commission. The city created the Arts Commission in about 1998. And they had an arts association, which still sort of exists. It's Burien Arts. They had an arts coalition, which used to do a showcase every year, and that was visual and performing arts.
Nice.
And I got on the Arts Commission about 2002, and stayed on for 8 years and chaired it for 2. So that was the beginning of, my involvement. And in that time, a lot changed. It was a time, I think, that a lot of artists were sort of flocking to the city, both performing artists and visual artists. And it was the first time the city had become a city in '93. We had a city manager who designated money for public art. And I served on some juries for public art. And I can go through the city and point out pieces to you and tell you when they went in. And then we had Town Square wasn't built, so we had a city hall, art receptions. And we had a lot visual art, and then the performing arts groups started to come together a little bit. I had attended, I can't remember even the exact year, but we went something in King County. They started South King County Cultural Coalition. So I went to that and then made the suggestion that we should meet and have art summits, which we did, and it was great, some of which were held in this very building we're sitting in before it was the museum. And people of all disciplines would come together, and then we'd have, either an all-day or half-day session breakout, and it was great, and it was a way to bring people in the community together, And then in the early 2000s, I got involved with coordinating art walks. And I started off by helping the person that was doing it, then took it over. Not a visual artist, but have a ton of friends who are visual artists. And I learned a lot about art. And I would go to other art walks in Seattle and all over and get tips. And then Discover Burien started in the early 2000s, and I was on that board for a couple years and helped sort of be a liaison between the Arts Commission, the arts community, and then Discover Burien, which was the business community. So then I would get the artists for the art walks, and we had them all up and down 152nd and 153rd, and then Discover Burien, Deborah, who's still around, would get the businesses. So we would have artists in the businesses. And then we'd also have musicians who would perform in the street. We had a info booth. And one year we got a grant and we had an amazing dance troupe come. And they did a progressive movement piece that went down the street. And we even had them in what's now the gelato place, was an ice cream store, and we had them in the windows of it.
Nice.
And they wound up down by the clock. And I remember when the clock was put in. That was part of public art. So, so there was a lot of that kind of stuff. And then just kept going. There were controversies. There was a piece of public art that was supposed to be when Town Square opened, and it didn't, and issues, and so I got very familiar. At one time, I knew every council member by heart, by first name, and so I also was kind of a liaison with the council and sort of helping to bring that together. So did a lot of that, and then when I got off the Arts Commission, because I started working for the city at the community center through Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Services. So there was that. And at the same time, I got re-involved. I am a person who is of an advanced age. I will hit at the end of June. I will hit the 3/4 of a century mark. I'm 74.
Congratulations.
And
it's not easy making it through life.
No. And I started acting when I was 7.
Wow.
So I had been doing that a lot. And so I kind of, when I got this job at the community center, and working with, Parks and Rec, I also got re-involved. There were times in my life where I'd stopped doing theater because family and became a stepmother and, parts of your life. And so I got re-involved right around the time 2009 when I started working permanently part-time for the city. And so I was kind of, again, a little bit of a liaison between the theater and the Parks Department, which basically was the landlord for the space that Burien Actors Theater had, which was called Burien Little Theater at that time. They changed their name. And so I got re-involved, and then I started more actively directing. And then that just sort of took off and continued to act. And through them, I met people who had Latino theater projects and other things. I did acting there. So I just kept going. But I also started to be more, I mean, it was always kind of like a community thing. There were all of these, like I say, the council, the business people, all these factors in the community.
Yeah.
And I would see, like, I've seen this, I had seen this in Seattle too, but I've seen it especially in Burien. I mean, there was a time when I said I was like the poster child for Burien. I love it. And this community is very interesting because it has a good downtown core, and it feels like a community when you walk through, just the physicality of it. And people would come together, and artists started to flock here. I mean, at the time, things were very affordable. Studio space was more available for visual artists. And the other thing I helped lobby for was to get, in the early 2000s, to get an arts and culture supervisor on the staff of the Parks Department, so that we had someone, Gina, who just retired last year.
Wow.
And we have somebody else, former arts commissioner. And so we then had somebody who could advocate and could also sort of be that official liaison through the city, through the business people, that kind of thing. So that was a big deal. And she did a great job. And then we had more events that featured arts. And way back, over 20 years ago, the city had consultants come in, and the issue has always been adequate space. And for theater, for dance, for visual artists, for everything. So there's always been that sense of needing like a comprehensive space that that would work for all. So that's and I just sort of kept going. I haven't been as involved lately. I've been very happy to see people that have stepped in and with this arts and culture district that venture that's going on now, and that the state designated Burien that way, because we have an amazing community of artists in Burien.
Yeah, that's what I'm discovering through this radio show, is it goes much deeper than I had anticipated when I started.
You'd be surprised at who you're going to find.
Yeah. Well, I have at least half a dozen questions popped into my mind. Over the course you were talking, I was trying to jot some of them down so I don't forget. The first is more of just a comment, really, but how cool it was that the city, you said it became a city in 93, seemed to have immediately been prioritizing art, because there was immediately an arts commission and like people trying to put it together at the government level as soon as it became a city. Which is very encouraging to hear.
It is, 5 years into it. We were very lucky because the first city manager, Gary Long, was somebody who had been the city manager in Eugene, Oregon. And this is an interesting thing. Many years ago, I was on tour with an independent production of A Christmas Carol, and we performed at the Holt Center for the Performing Arts in Eugene. And I knew the story about it, and he knew the story, which was that city was a sleepy little town, and then they built this performing arts center, comprehensive, and then the city grew around
in Eugene. Wow!
And so I personally knew, and the city manager personally knew, the value and the benefit of the arts in a community, how it literally transformed that community.
Yeah.
So he was the one who designated the money for public art. He was the one who was very supportive, and actually I think was on the board of the museum and has helped with the theater and remains, he's retired, but but remains an arts advocate as well. And, this sense of the fact that I don't think people realize what the contribution is that the arts make.
Yeah, that's a theme
You know.
that keeps coming up with people that I've spoken to as well, like how art, it really is an economically viable, a community sustaining
is.
thing. It's not just pleasant to look at, though it's that too. It's edifying on an individual level and for the artist, of course, but also for a community as a whole. It's something that we should pay attention to and invest in.
Yeah, it sets it up as a destination place as opposed to just, it's Burien, we're
Right.
near the airport, blah, 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 that kind of thing. And certainly you want people to come. And then what happens is that they come to see a performance or they come to a gallery, let's say, to an artist. And then they're spending money to go out
Yeah.
and have food. They're
Yeah.
they're contributing economically
Right.
to the community, And it also, it sets it apart. People say, oh, they have really cool stuff that goes on. I mean, we've had jazz festivals over the years. We've had, it's amazing. So yeah, it really does. It is really viable economically. And I also have said this for years. One of my personal little, theories or feelings about life is that over centuries, over thousands of years, governments come and go, buildings topple, whatever, but what survives? Love and art. Hundreds of years later, we still do Shakespeare's plays. We still listen to Mozart. We still look at the David and the Mona Lisa, and it's sustainable.
It outlasts our fragile human lives.
Yeah. Plus, it's also healing to me. I mean, another
Very.
issue I'm sure you've come across is that it's very, it's expression, it's healing. I mean, what sustains people? Like we just had the pandemic. I mean,
Yeah.
how did people make it through that? We had streaming, we had Zoom, we had,
We went
that
back
kind of
to
stuff.
back to art.
Yeah.
That reminds me, and a trigger warning. This is going to get a little dark. Trigger warning: Holocaust.
Okay.
But I've recently fallen down a documentary rabbit hole on YouTube of listening to survivor story of the Holocaust, and tremendously moving, but also makes you think of so many questions about humanity and everything. But one lady's really stuck with me. Her story, her name was Kitty Hart, and this documentary was made in the 70s, and she went back to Auschwitz with her son. And so it's just her walking around telling her son what happened at these different spots. But one of the things that she said was at some point she was working on the crematorium block and during the night shift. And so she was permitted at times during the day to sit on this tiny patch of grass with the other girls who had the same shift. And what they do out there is make up plays.
Oh God, I love this.
And when I heard
this.
that, I was just as an artist, straight to the heart. I'm like, you're literally watching people march to their death in the crematorium, and what you do to survive one of the darkest times of humanity is art. She said, they would pretend banquets of food, and they'd make up stories, and they'd cast the SS guards in their plays, and that is creativity, and art really is something we can use to sustain and survive even in the darkest of times. And you mentioned the pandemic as well, very dark time for many, many people. And we went back to art. We went back to the thing that sustains us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, you can be miserable and you can go on social media and somebody posts something beautiful and you go,
yeah, it literally takes your breath away.
Or, I get these emails with inspirational quotes from, all sorts of things and going way back and recent. And you're just like, you read just 3 lines that, whether it's poetry or whatever that, and you just go, oh God, thanks.
Yeah.
You just, changed my day.
Yes.
Or, that kind of thing. So, pretty amazing stuff. And I mean, I know for me that, I'm especially in 2020 and 2021. I mean, I retired in 2019 thinking I was going to have all these great adventures, and then boom, you know. And the Burien Actors Theater started doing Zoom theater, you know.
That's something I wanted to ask you about, because
Yes.
during the pandemic, a lot of big and small theaters had to adapt to Zoom, and you were a part of that process.
We were actually one of the first in Seattle to do
Wow.
it. We started, things started shutting down, and I think we did our first one in early spring of 2020.
Wow.
And we did in 2021 and 22, we did, I believe, 15 shows.
Oh my goodness.
And they were in essence staged readings. I mean, people were seated, but because they were looking into the camera, you didn't know they were reading, you know, kind of thing. It was very real. So we started with, I think we started with one that we had done live, and I wasn't involved with that. And then when we got started, it was a learning curve.
Oh yeah.
You know, and other places, and I had seen other places. I saw some streaming as time went on when people went back to live and were able to stream, and it wasn't, sound and lighting wasn't great, so it wasn't as, you know, effective an experience. But, and so what we would do is everybody was in their homes,
Yeah.
you know, and the theater was hosting it, and all sorts of stuff would happen because not everybody had the same technology,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And what became apparent was that we were dealing, to me, with a whole new art form.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's not film. And as a director, a lot of times as a theater director, you will get people auditioning or who you're working with who've got a lot of film experience. And film acting and theater acting are very different.
Very different.
And so it wasn't film, but it was like capturing the essence of live theater, but somehow on screen, you know.
Yeah.
And you had to learn, and we had snafus, you know. My favorite is I was co-directing a show with Maggie Larrick, the executive director, managing director, and we were also acting in it.
Oh.
It was about two ladies in a nursing home kind of thing, you know, retirement home. So you're there, and I had a physical script down here so that I could kind of like, you know, sort of eyeball it and look ahead. And all of a sudden, what we became aware of was if you were doing this on a weekend and if there was something public going on, and this happened to be 2020, Obama was still president, and he was giving a State of the Union address on the same night. So lots of Zoom is in use all over the country, and you don't realize breakdowns. You're going to get breakdowns.
Oh, right.
So what happened was that all of a sudden, they could hear me, but I could not hear them.
Oh no.
Myself. So this is the truth. But I had a script.
Oh man.
And I literally finished a scene by looking at it and lip reading them. And then sort of could start the second one and finally had to just stop and say, I'm so sorry. And the audience is hearing all this and everything, you know. And so literally we had to stop, and Eric, the artistic director, rushed to my house and replugged things and did this, you know, with masks, you know, and everything. And we went back on.
Yeah.
And then invited people to come the next day. And then that was it. Or somebody would cut out or something. But it got better and better. And we developed skills. Like we had a way of, if one character had to hand something to another, of doing it in such a way that it looked like we were literally leaning forward and handing it to them across the screen.
Yeah.
So for me, it was exhilarating. I mean, it got me through the pandemic, but also to be older and to be able to go, I just learned all of this stuff.
Yeah.
I learned all of this technical stuff, and and it was a different way to direct, you know?
Yeah.
And it was very exciting. And then now it's become a tool. Like you can do initial auditions on Zoom. You can do character work on Zoom. You can augment your live work. that way.
Definitely, yeah. And
You
Eric
know,
said that through that you gained a viewership all over the country through
we
those.
did. It was amazing because all of a sudden we started realizing people are watching from London, from Canada. My favorite was not a show that I directed, but was beautifully directed, was we did The Kiss of the Spider Woman, not the musical. There's a non-musical version. So two actors. The director was in Portland. One of the actors was in Portland. The other actor was in Costa Rica, and English was not his first language.
Oh, wow.
And yet, it was so brilliantly done that you thought that the two actors were in the same room because it's a
Wow.
play about two people in prison, and you have to think that. And so we had the Costa Rica person. We started to have people just, from all over. Another thing that happened was in 2022, Maggie and I co-directed a show called Destroying David by a wonderful playwright, Jason O'Dell Williams, that we'd worked with live. We'd done 2 of his shows live. And he really liked us. He'd never been able to see our shows, but corresponded back and forth. Let us do this script. We're doing the script. And I suddenly realized as we were rehearsing, I thought, Jason's in New York, but he could see this
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's on Zoom.
Uh-huh.
Well, sure enough, he did.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then came back and did talkbacks with us. And then because of that, we have a whole different relationship. Has sent us scripts, and the first one we did last year, and we got back to live theater. And
Did he write On the Market? Is he the one?
that's
who
the
wrote
one.
Yeah.
On the Market. We did On the Market. And then on Sundays, we'd Zoom him in the auditorium with the audience.
I love that.
So yeah, it created an international audience. It also created, and this is an important word, accessibility. There are people who cannot physically make it to the theater. I had friends who, had disabilities and could not, but they could watch it on Zoom.
Yeah.
And they love that. So that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And I think it changes one's it expands one's view of what theater is. And I think the same is true with art. You're seeing a lot of, with visual art and performing art these days, you're seeing a lot of immersive art.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. So I those are the things I think about with art. I think about the sustainability, the economic value. I think about accessibility. I think about expansion. I think about what are the possibilities.
Yeah.
What are the possibilities?
Well, that's a good way to segue into my next question is you have seen a lot of ebb and flow in the
Right.
art scene over the last 30 years and 25
Right.
years. So how would you like to see it expand in the future?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mentioned space, and I think there needs to be. Many times the city's had consultants come in, and everybody has said, "Oh, it'd be great if we had a multifaceted art space."
Art space. Yeah.
Not only for performance, but you could have visual, you could have that. So, space is one thing. I'd like to see, once again, I'd like to see the community working together as it had before with and trying to find ways that we can incorporate art into more events. I know there have been some art walks and there's been some art in businesses and that kind of thing. What are the ways, community-wise, what are the kinds of things, how can we come together
Yeah.
that way? I'd like to see that. I'd like to see more real active support from the city for the arts and more projects. It's not that they're not supportive at all, certainly, but I think that we've, because of how circumstances have been, we've had so much to deal with in this city with pandemic, with other kinds of issues, safety issues, and everything. And those are, I'm not saying they're unimportant,
Right.
but again, I've seen how the arts can bring a community together,
Yeah.
And one of the things I know, it's like the first time I ever went to New York, and sometimes you're walking down the streets and it's 1:00 in the morning and you feel really safe. Why? Because there's so much stuff going on, and
Yeah.
so I think in its own way it contributes to, to that,
Yeah.
to bringing it together. So, one of the things I'd like to see more of, we've had forever since I moved here, there have been dance companies. A couple of them have come and gone because they didn't have affordable space to perform. You know, they had rehearsal space, they had that, and teaching space, but not affordable space for performing.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see that, and I'd like to see visual and performing artists collaborating.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I once did a piece with someone who used to own a dance studio and used to be on the Arts Commission too, and whose name I will give you because she'd be a great interview. But and we did a movement piece in performance where I narrated Thurber's The Last Flower, and dancers did a movement piece moving that, you
Love
know, that way.
Yeah.
Things of that nature, you know, writers, musicians, visual artists, theater people.
Yeah.
You know, I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see more, you know, we've had some use of Town Square. Beard Actors Theater does our park show there, and we do it in other parks all around. But more use of that space,
Yeah.
you know, and even the library space and the space where the council meets and that kind of thing. What can we do to have a multi-dimensional, you know, thing? When I was a little girl, I lived in a small town in Florida, and I, from the time I was 7, had an amazing drama teacher who organized. She was an arts activist. She's my role model. And she organized this thing, and we had a small kind of, you know, mini version of the Hollywood Bowl, you know, outdoor amphitheater. And she organized something called the 7 Lively Arts, and like it was a week's worth of the arts. And this night was theater, and this night was poetry, and this was, you know, modern music, and this was and this was, you know, and then all around there was visual art and artists painting and everything. You know, some version of that.
Yeah.
I've thought about for years would be great. You
That
know.
sounds awesome. I recently interviewed Andrew McMasters of the Creative
Jet City. He used to
Burien
have,
district,
improv.
and he was a very fun interview. But one of the things he said is, for those listening, he is an actor, was trained as an actor, and has been foundational in the creative district of Burien. One of the things he says that brought him to Seattle was in the 80s, it was the place to be for actors. There was so much art happening here. Was that true in Burien? Did it trickle down here as well during that time, the 80s, 90s? Or was it just Seattle proper?
Let's see, I moved here in 93. So it was definitely true in the 80s. I moved to Seattle in 75. It was definitely true in the late 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. I don't think it was initially true in Burien in the 90s. I think that started to change as we got into the 2000s. But here's what I will tell you. Some version of Burien Actors Theater has been around for over 40 years. And, you know, long time, even longer than that. And it used to be more of what's called, and I'm doing for those listening air quotes, community theater. And I sort of say your Aunt Jane's community theater, meaning whoever wanted to do it could do it. And that's great. And there's a place for that. I'm not putting that down. But it began to change and evolve. And I think starting in the last 15 to 20 years, particularly 10 to 15 years, that it evolved into more of what I'd call regional theater. So different. And actors started coming. People seemed surprised. Where are you getting these actors from? Well, they come from the North End. They come from, you know, Bellevue. They come from, I mean, we've had people commute from Olympia, you know, they come. And so, yes. So I would think that the answer is yes. I think, I don't know for certain, but it may also be true with Highliners, which is, for anybody listening, more of a youth and children's theater that exists in town. And, but yes, I think it became more of a place to be. And what I hear from actors very recently is that they've had good experiences. They're treated well. It's kind of easy to commute to, for one thing. You know what I mean? It's really an easy place to get to. that sort of thing. And I think that they like the feeling. Also, audiences commute. I have great friends who started because they know me, but they live in Woodinville, and they loyally come. And you know what else they do after they go to see the theater? They go out.
They go out
to dinner.
Yeah.
Maybe
browse a bookstore.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it's drawn more people. I've also heard from actors that the PR out there on the theater is very good.
Oh, good.
And is very different from what it used to be.
Yeah.
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 Well,
But I'd also like to see not just Burien Actors Theater. I mean, it's my home theater and I love it, but I'd like to see more and very different kinds of theater. There was another time where we had another theater company in town, too.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, there used to be a winery on 153rd, and they eventually closed. And down underground they had a theater company, and it was great. It was great to have.
I love that. I love theater in the basement of a winery. That's just a very
and
romantic
only
setting.
only in Burien.
Only
you know
in
what I mean? And, I mean, it's just wonderful. Yeah, I like theater in odd and interesting places.
Yeah,
so,
I think that's kind of part of the vibe of theater.
Yeah. I think we're going to see a change soon in a good way. I think we're going to see an increased interest because I think we also now have people moving here who are younger. I mean, sometimes you get families, you get, there's just that ebb and flow. And I think, with pandemic, of course, everything down. But I think for some reason, instinctively, I think we're going to see some good stuff. With this Arts and Culture District is a good thing, too.
Yeah. Well, there's several thoughts there. I know I'm probably going to forget half of them. But one of the things when I asked Andrew McMasters, like, what does he think happened to that vibrancy of creativity, he said he thought it was primarily a matter of affordability.
Yep.
Not just in performing arts space, but surviving at all.
Yep.
And so part of that conversation was something I had never thought of, which is a way to support the arts is to provide affordable housing for artists because, he was saying
Absolutely.
back in the 80s, he bartended 2 nights a week and was able to do art the rest of the time. When you have that kind of flexibility, you can have art. And so that kind of ties into the younger people moving down here because I think they're getting priced out and that's where they can afford. Right. So that may, roundaboutly create a creative renaissance because it's where they can it's where they can live.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's a constant issue. It's like as a person who had an interesting and varied series of day jobs so that I could do theater most of my life.
Yeah.
But it's very affordability is important and support.
Yeah.
Like when I went back to support, I'd like, I think that not only affordable space to do your art, but living space.
Yeah.
Like I remember when they took the old Cooper School and in Delridge and made it into Youngstown Center. And there's, artist lofts and there was a theater company in it till very recently and all these things. And just that concept. And I think this is the idea of a potential project that could be happening in the city with, living space and artist space and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an important piece.
He's absolutely right.
Yeah.
I mean, I just couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
That's the issue in general.
And it's a shame. I mean, going back to the boost that art gives the economy in a city, it's really kicking yourself in the foot if you make it so that artists cannot create art. It's not actually actually the good investment. The good investment is to invest in art and artists.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So about art life, I'd love to hear more about your work as an actor and as a teacher. I know you worked as an audition coach.
Yeah.
And tell me about that.
So most of the last 15 years of my life has been spent as a director. Nice. It's kind of a natural segue when you get older, and also particularly for a woman. Now that's changing. I think one of the challenges has been, good roles for women who are older and that kind of thing. And I see that changing a lot, both commercially and, and locally. So yeah, I started very young and lived in Florida. Was very lucky to have a wonderful teacher, big fluke, just great. And then my mom and I moved when I was about 13 to LA,
Oh, wow.
and I did it a lot there. And then there were a few years in my 20s where I wasn't doing it, and then I moved to Seattle and got, within less than a year, got right back into doing theater. And it was, to echo what Andrew said, it was the place to be, but also it was so forthcoming, so welcoming, you know. So I did a lot of, and I was there used to be a long time ago, late 70s, 80s, I was a founding member of a theater company called the Brass Ring Theater. And we got reviewed by, you know, all the major papers at the time, and we did all that. And I, like I said, I've been on tour with productions and, you know, done a lot. And then I sort of in midlife took time off because I fell in love with someone who had 5 kids, became a stepmother. You know, all these things happen. And so, and then I one day met Maggie and Eric in a store. This is the truth. And I thought, oh, I like them. And I had, prior to that, didn't seem to have a lot of interest in, even though I'd done a show many years ago at Beery, you know, didn't. And then I got back involved. But I ended up initially helping out. I've done everything in theater. I've been a house manager, stage manager, box office, you know, I've done it all. And started helping with that, and then sort of snuck into, we used to do these New Works festivals. Oh, I think I'll direct maybe some stage readings, you know, and then it just went from there. And then through that, I met some people who worked with our theater a lot, and they had a company, Latino Theater Projects in Seattle. And so they called me and said, we want you to do a show. And I got back later in life. And then I did some acting with Beery Actors Theater. And I'm here to say, for anybody listening out there, it's never too late.
Yeah.
And you can still, I would say that I have done probably the bulk of some of the best theater in my life since I turned 60.
Oh, wow.
So
I love hearing
you
that.
know, so yeah, and being an actor really helps being a director. You have a sense of understanding and that you wouldn't otherwise. Audition coaching is not the thing I've done the most of, but how that came about was that when you're directing and you have people who audition for you, and it's different being on the other side of the table.
Sure is.
And so you notice very often as an actor auditioning, you're asked to, you know, you do your thing, and then a director may say, okay, that's great. Could you try this? Or could you do it this way? You know, and sometimes that would throw people. Or you'd have people who, you know, just sort of weren't prepared or whatever. So it started with one actor who was somebody I'd worked with and directed, coming to me and saying, I'm going to audition for TPS, Theater Puget Sound, for those of you who don't know. And they do annual, you know, general auditions. And she said, I need help. And she had done a lot of theater, but hadn't done a lot for a while. And so I said, yeah, I'll meet with you, you know. And I met with her. And immediately, it could see what was needed. You know, it's like, oh, this person needs to learn this, or they do, you know. And again, that's very instinctive.
Yeah.
And she said, and she had a great TPS audition, and she's been working ever since. She does a lot of film, she does a lot of, but other people, it also was, when I was working at the Parks Department, there were kids wanting to get into Highliners productions and who knew nothing about auditioning.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, oh, I can help.
I got you.
You know,
Yeah.
I got this. And so I started doing it. So I've done it, you know, not a lot, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then people would say, oh, you know, boy, I talked to a lot of people and yours was just the most helpful, you know. So I just come from, what would I want to know? What would I want someone to do for me? You know, that sort of empathy thing. And one of the wonderful things about being an actor, being a director, is that empathy is big,
Yeah,
because what you have to
essential.
do is when you're an actor and you're approaching a role, you have to go, oh, if I were this person, how would I behave?
Yeah.
What would I do? So that really helped with the coaching,
Yes.
and the teaching. The teaching started with at my old theater, Brass Ring, years ago, with offering theater workshops because I just knew that it was something I could do well.
Yeah.
And again, that's another sort of, and then I knew somebody who said, would you be willing to come and teach what we now sort of refer to as people with special needs, different abilities, at King County ARC. And I was like, okay, I guess. And then I went and, oh my God, I learned so much. And I worked with all, Down syndrome people, with everything. And that was just, and I did it in several different organizations. And that was just so amazing. And again, how would you feel if you were this person, and how would you approach? And it also taught me the thing I think that's so important that you learn from teaching, and especially from doing improv, and I also have done improv, is that how to think on your feet.
Yes.
How to
Yes.
respond immediately with no matter what's thrown at you.
Yeah.
I was teaching a class once, and I had a guy that was maybe 27 or so, and he was somewhere on the spectrum and neurodivergent, and he would consistently stop me. I'd be talking, and he'd say, Rochelle, I wonder, blah, blah, blah. It was something unrelated. And so one day he just there's a bookshelf, and he grabs the dictionary, and he's like looking, and I'm saying, Andrew, I think I need you to concentrate, and blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden I just go, give me that dictionary. And he goes, what? And I go like this, and I go, okay, find a word. And he finds a word, and I go, and I just say to everybody else, okay, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to read you what this word means, and then each of you is going to get up here, and you're going to show me that word. You're going to act out that word. So I created the dictionary game.
I love
It was
it.
one of the most favorite things, stuff like that.
Yeah.
The
Go with
ability,
it.
to respond, to be able to sort of, oh, this isn't working. Let's go with this,
Yeah.
Which you learn when you're on stage with someone who forgets their lines, or you forget yours, or you're on stage, all of which has happened, where all of a sudden music is playing, and the person who's in the booth has gotten so involved in the show that they forget, and it all of a sudden goes dead, and you have to ad lib for 2.5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
So it makes you more sensitive. It makes you more aware, and willing to take risks and all that. Okay.
Yeah, that was a conversation again with Andrew McMasters. I asked him about, improv in life and the ability to say yes and roll. It's really essential for anyone, and something you learn if you're in the theater or acting or kind of any sort of creative endeavor, really, because things are going to happen.
But I've seen it with visual artists too.
Yes.
I've seen an artist who starts off with a particular medium, or they're trying to achieve a particular effect, and it's not, and all of a sudden, it's not working, and all of a sudden, oh, if I did this becomes, and then it puts them in a whole different direction, or a different medium, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I love when I see that happen.
Yes.
And it happens with music, and it happens with dance, and it happens with writing.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about that too, about art as a living thing, because as you've had, and any creative does, this long relationship with art that ebbs and flows like any other relationship. It started at 7 years old, and throughout your life, there were times it laid fallow, and there was times you got back in, and you have to reorient yourself to it as if you're strangers, and it's this sort of dance with an entity that you have throughout life. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes. Oh, well, beautifully put, by the way. Really beautifully put. Yes, it is. It's a strange thing because, I like I said, I started at 7, but I knew at 3 or 4, and and you hear people say, oh, it's not a matter of you want to do this.
Yeah.
You have to do it. It's just essentially who you are, you know, and you know that. And yes, there have been times when you say, whew, I have to stop. I remember at one point needing to stop because I felt that theater was, by its nature, an art in which you seek the approval of others. Okay, you can write at home, you can sing at home. I mean, maybe not, maybe dance, you have to have physical space. But with theater, you got to go audition for somebody, you know, and it's very subjective. It's not, you know, I mean, you could be wonderful and just not what they need,
Yeah.
you know. And you perform for an audience, so you're seeking approval. And I was at a place in my life where I just needed to seek my own approval. I just didn't need that. So I stopped for a while. And then I got back in because people came to me. I've been so lucky in my life with people just coming and saying, we want you to do this, you know, that kind of thing. And so somebody came and I got re-involved, okay? And then I stopped again. I needed to work and I needed to make money.
Yeah.
You know,
and that happens.
And that was a big deal. And then getting back in, and then I was directing but hadn't done a lot of acting. And I remember when I started acting again, and it's different being older. And fortunately, I'm not somebody who's ever had trouble learning lines, even older. So that
that's
was
very good.
People always go, "How do you learn those lines?" I go, "That's like the most minutial thing you want to ask an actor. You know, there's so much more." Anyway, I remember saying to somebody at the community center, I said, this is how I feel. I feel like I left and I went to live in another country for a while. And people were like, yeah, welcome, it's great here. And I enjoyed it. It was good. I did other stuff and it was great. And then I got a chance to go back home to visit, and it was like, oh,
Right.
yeah,
a breath of fresh air.
that's how it was for me.
Yeah.
It's there. So then to be now this age and to have the joy and the privilege of being able to practice your art, you know, to do it still. And I'm also looking at, you know, because I'm a storyteller and I think that's the essential nature of theater, is telling the story, and of a lot of art,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
creating the story, is that, and I have fun stories from my life and my art, and people go, well, you need to write a book or do a one-woman show, or you need to write these down. So that's my next thing is, maybe I should write,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
kind of thing. Not plays, but,
Right.
you know.
Well, as a writer, I very much encourage this endeavor.
Do you? Oh, good.
Yes,
Oh, good.
very
We'll have
much.
to talk. Well,
Yeah.
fun. Yeah, I think I might start with like blogging or something.
Yeah, that's
you
a great
know.
place to start. Yeah.
Anyway, so yes, it is this entity, but it's what feels at home. I mean, you know, you're sitting in a pandemic, you're doing Zoom. It's like I'm doing theater. You know, I'm doing something. I'm creating. And creation is something that happens every day. I mean,
Yes.
you know, you get up in the morning and you're creating your day.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you're creating your life, you know. And so I just think that's, yeah, I think it is something that's always with you. I think it's good to stop sometimes and sort of pull back and breathe and take a look at, okay, what's happening in the world and what's, you know. But going back to it, it's, you know, who are you in the world?
Yeah.
What informs you? How do you observe and how are, you know, and be in the world?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that, and for a while there, I felt like, ugh, you know, and then one of my dearest friends, and she said to me, oh, I don't care if you're not doing it. She said, you're an actress. You've always been an actress. That's who you are. And it's like, yeah, I could be mostly a director these days, but yeah.
Yeah,
That's how I
there's a
see it.
core.
There's
Yeah,
a core.
and even if there's a period of estrangement
Yes.
with the art, it's like any
Yeah.
sort of long-term relationship. I mean,
It is.
and it can be difficult to explain to people. You know, I'm a musician, and when I was younger, it was like a hardcore musician, but it's been difficult to explain when people are like, do you still play? It's like, well, like you're saying, it's like, it's there, but like we have been estranged for
Yes.
many years,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
and that's just kind of a part of it. It's a relationship, really.
But you might be surprised that it might come back into your life.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
You know what I mean?
Way,
And
yeah.
it might come in a way that you don't expect.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm intending. I'm expecting that.
Yeah.
Well, this has been lovely. Is there anything else you'd like to add or make people aware of about your work now or in the community?
Yeah. Currently, well, I just finished directing a show that was the Christmas show, and I'm helping the artistic director read scripts. That's one of the things I do, is kind of sort of dramaturge and doing that. And just I think what I said before in terms of the community in paying attention to what's going on with the arts in general in Burien helps me, helps everyone, and that sense of welcoming. I mean, that thing I loved when I came to the Northwest is that there's somehow a freedom to be yourself.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I would say that, to me, the biggest challenge I have faced and a lot of people face is not trusting yourself. It's just not trusting. And one of my, little catchphrases that I love, it's an Oscar Wilde quote, and it's "Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken."
Yep.
And I think that if you are a creative person in any way, that you're unique and you're different, and just trust it. And are there times you're going to get knocked down? Are there times you're going to pull back? Yeah. But I think that just, go with your heart and your gut. And community-wise, I would say, maybe everybody who's listening, pay attention to what's going on in your own community. I mean, take a look and see, is there a show you can see? Is there an exhibit you can go to? Is there a musician you can hear? And we got a lot of people, and take a look at, maybe putting your support towards that, whether it's emotional, financial, or just showing up.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Support the arts. Thank you for joining us today for the B-Town Breakdown. You can join us next week on Friday at 6 p.m. at 106.5 KQWZ LPFM.
Tune in for a new show every Friday at 106.5 KQWZ LPFM, South King County.